This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hi everybody and welcome back to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Carl Sweeney, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, which is the series we're doing at the moment, which we've been doing for, 2 or 3 months now, where we go through the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. And we are into the second half of the movie now, of course. We are at minute 63, which kicks off at the 62-minute mark. With, we get a brief sighting of that two-headed dog at the beginning of this minute. And we go through to 62 minutes, 59 seconds, and that's midway through an exchange between Mulder and Scully. Mulder's asking Scully, I think, what she's doing here. And joining me on this episode for another block of minutes after we teamed up earlier in the run is Clara Cook. How are you doing, Clara?
I'm doing well, Carl. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, no worries. I promise not to rap at you in this block of minutes. Well,
I enjoyed that, though.
I have no intention of rapping at this stage anyway. We'll see how it goes. It's good to be back. And before we get going, a quick reminder, listeners, that you can follow us on social media. And also, if you're enjoying the show, it would be great if you could drop us a quick rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It doesn't have to, take up loads of your time. Just a one-line review would be great. And preferably a 5-star rating as well. Okay, Clara, like I said back there, before we get on to the new scene that we're sort of talking about here, there is a very brief sighting of the two-headed dog at the start of this minute, isn't there? What Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz were talking about on the audio commentary for the movie is, like, how much of the dog do you show? And Carter was talking about wanting to keep that two-headed dog kind of in silhouette so that it's kind of an oblique look at the dog that you get, and adding to that, Spotnitz said something about how the studio was very concerned about the two-headed dog because it's the kind of thing that could look, quite silly very easily. And what do you think? It is a very kind of brief glimpse at the two-headed dog, isn't it? It's quite easy, I think. It's kind of blink and you miss it, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's actually silly in this situation. Like it's like a little hint of things to come, and I don't think it's done badly or anything. I guess it's just interesting for the people who are properly paying attention to the movie. Not that I'm criticizing people who are just not paying attention, but you know what I mean? Like, as in, it's like the X-Files was filled with stuff like that. I think as a series, like, did you catch that? Did you see that? Hints to things in the future, hints to further scenes in the future. So I think it's quite effective, really. I have to say, I really hate the idea of a two-headed dog. Unless it was naturally born, like a conjoined dog twin or something. Or it's from myth, like Carabus, who's a 3-headed dog. Yeah, that's one of the things I don't like about this film is the treatment of dogs. Just, I've become more sentimental in my old age towards animals.
Yeah. Or I suppose the on-screen treatment of dogs, I'm sure it was all, above board.
Of course, yeah. I mean, they don't treat human beings very well in the movie either, do they? So I don't know why I'm getting so sentimental about the dogs.
That is a thing that happens, though, isn't it? There are people who can watch all sorts of murder and, destruction to people and then really struggle to watch a cat being shot or a dog being harmed in some way. Yeah. In terms of you talking about people paying attention, do you mean the fact that this dog kind of ties into the experiments that the abductors are carrying out on people? That's what you mean? There's a link
exactly. And then then a few minutes later, well, about 6 or 7 minutes later, you are going to see something in a bag. Should I spoil it? You're going to see a head in a bag. And that's going to tie in with the two-headed dog, and then that's all going to add up to the end, crescendo of when Mulder finds the site where they're operating and stuff. So it's like breadcrumbs, isn't it, really?
And I think you do have to be quite active as a viewer of this movie and joining a lot of the dots in a way that I think it is quite subtle in certain ways, some of the connections between things. Okay, so then, like I said, that's just the opening few seconds of this minute, really. And then we move on to a scene at the dorm that we talked about before, I think, where Father Joe lives, and Mulder arrives. Scully is already there, and I think Mulder seemed quite startled, or at least surprised, didn't he, that Scully would be there after the discussion they had had earlier in the film. Scully saying she didn't want the darkness in her life anymore and that kind of thing. What has happened previously is that Father Joe had a seizure when he was talking with Scully, and now he's being taken away. And then there's a discussion, isn't there, with Dakota Whitney, filling us in on the backstory that they have a suspect. It's the character played by Callum Keith Rennie, who's called, I think, Yank Dakishin, which may not be the right pronunciation, but he's a Russian emigre working as an organ transporter. We've seen a scene of him being questioned, and then off-screen he's been released. They didn't have enough to hold him on, but they think he's, tied up in this because they have a witness who saw him swimming in that pool where the women have been. And Mulder makes the connection that he thinks this man is the person Father Joe saw in his vision. So, what did you make of all of this, Clara?
Well, the first bit where Mulder arrives and Scully's in the sort of halfway housing, the housing that the ex-offenders, paedophiles, are stored in. Sex offenders is what I'm trying to say. Sex offenders are stored in, staying in. I thought it was quite amusing how guilty she looks. Like, somehow she's caused Father Joe's seizure or something. I mean, she hasn't, obviously, but she went there to yell. You went there to yell at the guy. I mean, and now he's been taken away in an ambulance. I mean, I might feel a little guilty.
Do you think it's because the fact that she is there at all? That she had that conversation with Mulder about not being involved with dark things, and is this their life anymore? And now she's there. They're
going to break up, right? Like, they're living together, and then they're going to break up, and it's almost like an end of them working together, but also like an end of a relationship. And then the next thing he sees is her standing there, in this place where she sort of said she wasn't, I can't do it anymore, Mulder. It's very dramatic. I can't be with you anymore. And there she is. I think this is the first time we actually see him angry, really, with her. It's very rare that Mulder gets angry at Scully. In fact, the whole of the X-Files. There's a few times in the series where he gets quite angry at her. He might argue with her. He might debate with her. He might get frustrated with her, but he normally reserves his anger for other people. And I think he was actually angry because he's like, what are you doing here? Like, he's pissed off. There's a few times where he does get really angry with her, and he normally sort of clams up and gets quiet and gets pissed off when he's angry at her. Like, he doesn't yell at her or scream at her or anything. Like, he's not that kind of person. But it's the way David Duchovny sort of suddenly switched around, like turned around and just sort of said, like, what are you doing here? Like, what the fuck? And I thought the fact that they were fighting and arguing in front of the other FBI agents was quite interesting. I was like, I don't think they would normally also fight in front of other people either. So it was quite a dramatic scene. It's full of drama. The description of who the villain is and why he's doing what he's doing. Well, we don't know exactly why he's doing what he's doing, but the description of who he is, the fact that he works with, organ transplants, that does kind of make sense. The fact that, maybe it was Father Joe who saw this guy kind of does make sense. I think there's a few issues with the villain. I'm not sure whether I should bring up with this minute or some later minutes.
Well, he does appear on screen later in our block, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So maybe that would be... I think I know sort of what you're driving at with that, maybe. But in terms of the villain, though, one thing we could talk about is the fact that there are references to this illegal organ trafficking or illegal organ trading, I suppose. And do you know much about how that all works in reality, Clara? Because I was looking at an article yesterday on theconversation.com, and it's sort of saying that the whole trade, it is a real concern, and it's a bit more sophisticated though than people tend to think. Because I think you have maybe people have a sense that organ transplants that are like illicit in this way are kind of done in back alleys and that kind of thing. But what it was saying is that actually most illegal organ transplants are done. Yeah, they predominantly do take place in hospitals and clinics. They take place with the involvement of medical staff. So it sounds like it's a bit more kind of formalised and organised than you probably would tend to think, maybe from media representations of this kind of thing,
Yeah, I think media representations are, the sort of like typical kind of urban legend of like waking up in a bath of ice with like missing a kidney and like the phone nearby so you can call 911 or something, I don't think that's really how it works. And I don't think it can work that way because in order for organs to remain healthy and make them arrive at a patient without having degraded or become useless in any way, you actually need to keep them in a particular environment, particular temperature. They need to be transported a certain way, need to be done in a certain time. So it would make sense that that the illegal aspect of this would be done in hospitals or in medical facilities, because otherwise back alleys it's not going to work, right? The organs are not going to survive that kind of environment. I did read ages ago that there was it might have been Amnesty International that talked about this actually at one point, that there's some suspicions that in some countries where people have less rights, possibly places like China, where execution or capital punishment is still legal, that people can have their organs removed. So prisoners who are being executed or something can have their organs removed, and organs like that can make their way onto some sort of international organ transplant, process. And I guess that's technically legal in the country where that happens, but whether or not any of these prisoners have ever consented to having their organs be transplanted. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like...
Yeah.
So I think there's also ways in which it happens in other situations that aren't necessarily happening in hospitals, but, it has happening in places where human rights is not really top priority for the government or the authorities.
Yeah, well, this article I was looking at, it says that the World Health Organization estimated, it's an old estimate, it's 2008, but it was saying that about 5% of all organ transplants worldwide are illegal. Living donor kidneys are the most commonly reported form of organ trade. Like I say, it's quite an interesting article. It was talking about how do you address the problem of illegal organ trading, and it was, let me see if I can... The author is a woman called Frederica Ambagd-Shia, and it's on theconversation.com if you want to search for it. In terms of the rest of this minute, Clara, the only other thing I picked up from the audio commentary was Chris Carter talking about how this scene at the dorm kind of reminded him that there are things you can do when you're making a movie that you can't do on a TV schedule and budget, because he talked about how he had kind of planned out the scene, the night before, where the actors are going to be positioned and blocked out and that kind of thing. And then he came back the following day and realised that he wanted to start all over again, which is a very time-consuming thing. He realised that he'd kind of hemmed himself in with what he was planning to do. And, it sounded like it ruffled a few feathers. The executive producer, Brent O'Connor, wasn't happy with Carter and so on. But I think his point was that when you're making a movie, even though you're on a schedule, you've got a budget, but there is a bit more time to take stock, to maybe change plans, which I suppose that just wouldn't be possible with it on the kind of schedule they would work to. I think the X-Files had when they were making episodes, they had a better schedule than a lot of shows did and a bigger budget. But even so, I imagine it was very much against the clock filming those old episodes, Yeah,
and I imagine that's also a real issue for TV series that of the past that had 20, 25, 22 episodes per season. I wonder if they have the same problem with those sort of much shorter episodes.
8 episodes,
10 episodes, miniseries, yeah. On the other hand, though, maybe they do, because maybe miniseries they're obviously being shot to a deadline, and then everyone has to go work on a different miniseries, or the next project. Or I think the longer people work together, though, you kind of get this feeling that the more they know each other, the more likely it is they'll know that Chris Carter will come in the next morning and want to change things. So maybe in those longer seasons of TV, they will have built time around quirks of the director or quirks of the producer or the eccentricity of the stars or the,
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You'd hope they'd all learn each other's working styles and will sort of adapt and evolve around each other.
Yeah. So as this minute ends, this scene is continuing. Scully is saying to Mulder that, now you're wasting their time. So what I reckon we should do is we should draw a line under this now and pick it all back up again in the next episode, Clara, which will be looking at this is 63, isn't it? So the next one, logically, must be minute 64. How does that sound?
That sounds good, yeah.
Okay, right. So thanks for listening, everybody. We will be back to cover that minute 64, very soon. But until then, always remember, trust no one.